Fox of Buckley.
My Lords, this amendment attempts to repeal the Defence of Reasonable Punishment as part of the Children's Act, and that would effectively, in my mind, criminalise parents for reasonably chastising their own children. In doing so, the amendment raises a number of ethical pitfalls that I think the state faces whenever it legislates in policing private family life in a free society. Historically, we've recognised that state interventions into family life should be rare, proportionate and handled with due respect for parental autonomy. In recent years, sadly, we've seen an unfortunate trend towards top-down overreach, and this amendment is a good illustration. In the whole of the Domestic Abuse Bill, with its focus on helping those abused in domestic settings or contexts, we still need to remember that this is not a green light to tear up all the norms of privacy and liberty when it comes to family life. Essentially, this amendment would remove the legal defence of reasonable chastisement from parents who might occasionally smack their own children. Effectively, this declares that the government knows better than loving parents who could find themselves vulnerable to charges of common assault just for being parents. Of course, there will be people here who might not approve of slapping. We've already heard some. But that's their business. That is no justification for overruling other parents' decisions or their values. Should we assume that the state always knows best when it comes to child rearing? I'm sure that those raised in care homes might have a different view. Also, this amendment is entirely unnecessary because it's already illegal to aim a smack at a child's head or hit a child with an object or any smack that leads to more than the temporary reddening of skin. In other words, unreasonable punishment is already against the law, and rightly so too. The vast majority of society view violence aimed at children as abhorrent. They think that beating children shouldn't just be illegal, but morally condemned, as we all do. So what would this amendment outlawing even a reasonable use of smacking achieve? The amendment states that, and I quote, "Battery of a child cannot be justified on the grounds that it constitutes reasonable punishment." And of course, battery can't be justified on the basis of reasonable punishment. But think about that use of that word battery. It conjures up horrors, doesn't it? And why was that word used in this amendment? I noticed in campaigns to ban smacking in Wales and Scotland that one of the most egregious tactics of anti-smacking lobbyists was this irresponsible conflation of smacking with gross acts of violence. This rhetorical trick is shameless and shamefully distorts intention and context. I think it's important to state for the record that violence is physical force intended to injure. In contrast, if a mum or dad smacks a 5-year-old child for being naughty, they have no intention of causing injury. Rather, they, all of us, want to teach our own children right from wrong, to chastise them for running in front of a car or whatever. And this is driven by parental love, not a desire to injure. Conflating slapping with violence paints ordinary mums and dads as potential violent thugs or child abusers. It's just so insulting, and it shows a certain distrust of ordinary parents that we heard tonight people describing smacking and beating the living daylights of children in the same sentence. To the noble Baroness Bennett, who argued that we should treat the smacking of a child as we treat the bodily attack on a grown adult. Again, let's think about context. Do we really believe that children should not be treated differently to adults? In the real world, parents do many things to their children that they wouldn't dream of doing to another adult. When you order a child to bed, you don't order adults to bed, do you? When you check to whether your child's bottom is clean, you wouldn't do that to an adult. Children, we do treat differently to adults, especially our own children. If you confiscate your teen's Xbox or phone, we don't consider that theft because of the context. It's common sense disciplinary action, as smacking can be, and smacking is not assault or even comparable. So, my lords, I hope you agree with me that parents are better placed to judge when and how to discipline their offspring than any number of NGOs, even if they come waving state-approved parenting manuals full of best practice checklists and count to 10. Finally, the danger with overreach is when it expands who and what is that it expands who and what is criminalised. And as I've warned several times during this bill, and as the noble Baroness Hoey pointed out, this could open the floodgates to complaints of minor incidents to police and social services and overwhelm already overstretched services. When I argued this in Wales in relation to the debate there, I was assured that the legislation was not about criminalising parents, but sending a message. But politicians can't change the criminal law and expect the police and courts not to enforce it. It's not a communication strategy. But also, the Scottish Government encouraged the public to phone 999 if they witnessed any parents smacking their child, and have also distributed leaflets aimed at children, urging them to report on their parents. Can you imagine how divisive that is, how demoralising and damaging it is to family life? And how does it protect children if the law undermines parental authority, if families are ripped apart by damaging police investigations because a child was smacked? And I think it would discredit the whole concept of domestic abuse as well as child abuse if, under this bill, we were to treat smacking as assault and do ourselves an assault on family coherence. Finally, my lords, for many weeks now, we, following this domestic abuse bill, have focused on the dark side of family life. And earlier this evening, we heard harrowing tales of stalking and abuse and women at risk, and so on. However, we must make sure that this doesn't poison our worldview, and we should avoid starting to see abuse everywhere. Behind closed doors is not a dystopian hellhole. The majority of families are joyous places of solidarity and socialising children that are sometimes messy, sometimes argumentative, sometimes a bit of shouting, sometimes the odd smack, but they are largely full of love. This amendment suggests otherwise and should be rejected. Yeah.